Hi, thanks for watching. Okay, so in this video, in the wake of the recent incident with Captain Joseph Emerson, the Alaska captain who had a nervous breakdown and attempted to interfere with the flight controls on Horizon 2059, that was last week. Okay, so in the wake of that, I'd like to talk about mental health and mental fitness for aviation. Okay, just as a reminder, sorry, I'm embarrassed to talk about it, but I used to be a commercial pilot and I've had my own mental issues. Okay, and I have noticed in the last few years, what I think are a lot of kind of troubling incidents, some involving behavior in the cockpit. Okay, I don't think a lot of people have to be reminded. There've been some hot mic incidents with Southwest. It's not the end of the world, but it's reflective. Maybe of a certain complacency, not observing sterile cockpit. When it should be. And also, just like there was a recent incident with Southwest Airlines where one of the captains actually took off all his clothes and started masturbating and watching pornography while the airplane was flying and with a female first officer. A very disruptive, very poor judgment. I'm not going to argue that it was a totally unsafe thing to do, because who knows, but it just reflects a real striking lack of judgment and maybe just a kind of complacency. Okay. And now, if people could get away with the complacency, maybe I wouldn't say anything, right? Maybe a little bit of complacency maybe is okay if people aren't getting in trouble, except that in the last few years, and I don't think any pilots can deny this, I think there have been a lot of sort of runway environment, airport environment losses of separation, where airplanes are getting way too close. We have, let's say, margins set up, and the FAA sort of sets up guidelines where, at least on the same runway, you want to have between 2 and 3 miles of separation, or two stretching to 3, 3 miles, kind of a guideline for separation between, let's say, landing traffic and traffic taking off on a runway. And just basic separation guidelines for the runway airport environment, which lately we've been seeing a lot of kind of mistakes, lapses in judgment, maybe some complacency on the pilot's part, maybe being too robotic about just following whatever ATC says and not double checking to make sure it's a good clearance, or making sure it's within one's personal tolerances. And then pilots sort of going along with maybe a bad instruction, and then you end up with just a very uncomfortable lack of separation, loss of separation between aircraft. And I'm telling you, one of these days, I'm sorry, just last week, I'm sorry to say, but we had another one of these incidents at Houston Hobby, where you have two business jets. You have a Citation landing on I guess a crossing runway, and then you have a Hawker business jet taking off. So you got intersecting runways. And apparently, we'll have to see, the full investigation. But apparently, the Hawker felt that he was cleared to take off. He was cleared to taxi into position and hold, to line up and wait. And I guess later on, he felt like he was cleared to actually take off, right? The FAA says he wasn't given a clearance. The bottom line is, through some misunderstanding, some mistake, he ends up rolling, and I guess he wasn't aware there was landing traffic on the crossing runway, and they actually collided. Okay, these two jets actually collided, and just by luck, the collision was just the end of the wingtip of the Hawker, with just the very end, I think, one of the wings and the very tail end of the Citation. And so the Hawker actually, after the collision, was able to continue and do a pattern and land. But, it just goes to show that these complacencies. Oh, and that's very similar to a problem at Boston, where a Learjet had also similarly taken off without actually getting a clearance, later on admitting that he just was having a bad day, that he was having a cold, that he wasn't feeling well. And you get these losses of separation, where a JetBlue, I think the JetBlue was landing, and I think had to go around, but they actually took a picture where the crossing Learjet on the crossing runway was just, I'm sorry, it was just way too close. Okay. And so what's going to happen is, it sounds like it's not a big deal, whatever. And I've seen it happen. When I was flying, I actually saw incidents where you'd have one airliner taking off and another airliner on approach got within 1 mile or within half a mile and had to go around. And you have two aircraft climbing out, very close and separating like that. And I've seen it, and I know it happens. I know it's a statistical inevitability, but we don't want to make it more frequent than it has to be, because eventually what's going to happen, and I don't, I think people just have trouble remembering, but it was only in 1991. And if I got the date wrong, I think it was 1991. Let me just say 91. If I'm plus or minus a couple of years, it was the LAX U.S. air crash, and it was a crash. Okay, and we're just lucky it wasn't two big planes, right? It was actually a 737 U.S. Air that actually landed right on top of a Metroliner, a SkyWest Metroliner, that was told to taxi into position and hold, and the tower just kind of forgot that there was the U.S. Air on very short final, right? And just whatever, just distraction. But and the U.S. Air ended up landing right on top of the Metroliner. Now, if that had been, let's say, another large aircraft, like say if that had been, Metroliner is a small commuter airliner, but if that had been, like say, a 737 taxied into position and hold, and then a 737 lands on another 737, I mean, I'm sorry, you know, let's be honest, these are the kind of mistakes that will create, I'm sorry, hundreds of dead people, right? Hundreds of dead people. And so let's just not forget. Let's not forget that aviation, at least at the level, even private aviation, just like Part 91, just flying like a private plane or whatever. I'm sorry. I mean, if you get in a weird situation, you're complacent. Let's say you're complacent. I don't know, maybe you're complacent about your multi-engine skills. Maybe you're complacent about flying into ice. But the bottom line is, if you end up spinning a light twin and you land in a neighborhood, you can kill 15 or 20 people. I'm sorry, if you land on a house, or, you land in an apartment complex. And I'm sorry. I mean, it's, I know we like to not get dramatic, and I'm not saying to get dramatic. I'm just saying to take into account that you can kill, 15, 20 people just in a neighborhood. But a midair between two airliners, I'm sorry, the LAX disaster, the U.S. Air, where they landed on a Metroliner, that was just dumb luck that they landed on top of a small plane. If they had landed, if they had collided on landing with, like, say, another 727 or a 737, I'm sorry, that would have been major. I mean, that would have been, like 350 people potentially could have been killed. And so we're talking numbers that are so big that I think this ability that pilots have, to sort of fall into complacency and feel in this comfort zone. There's no comfort zone, and there shouldn't be, And I think that's part of the job. You get paid a lot of money. And I think you get paid a lot of money to not live in a comfort zone. There's no comfort zone. You're in a runway airport environment. That's a dangerous environment. And I think that it's almost kind of like something cultural around aviation, the sort of emphasis on the safety. And I think that's just bullshit. Aviation is really not inherently safe at all. And it's kind of the same thing. People get complacent around firearms, and the more complacent you are around firearms, accidents. Yeah, when you have an accident with a firearm, you kill one or two people. With an airplane, you kill 150 or 300 people. And so I think complacency around aviation and this kind of bullshit idea of how safe it is. Yeah, I understand it's pretty safe, but I don't think that's the right attitude. You know what I mean? I think yes, we do have a pretty remarkable aviation system, but I still think the responsible attitude is to treat it as very dangerous, really dangerous. And so I want to talk about a couple incidents here specifically, and how I think complacency is a big factor. And also, I think that I've watched a lot of much more experienced aviation people than I'm not. I stopped flying in 1992. Okay, so I'm not trying to pretend I'm more experienced, but I've watched a lot of experienced people on YouTube talking about these very incidents that I'm going to mention. Okay, and the big focus was on ATC is inexperienced, ATC made a mistake, and not enough on how pilots do not have to accept clearances if they do not feel their situational awareness is rock solid. Okay. If there's any asterisk, if there's any circumstance that is sort of putting sort of a little bit of an asterisk in somebody's situational awareness, you do not have to accept a clearance. And very easily, you can just say, hey, tower, we can just wait. We'll wait for a second to let the other guy land. No problem. Or they can even lie a little bit and say, hey, we're a little busy with something in the cockpit. Can you give us about a minute, just to let the other guy land and not to run the risk of taxiing into position and having any any loss of separation with a landing aircraft. Okay. And the usual scenario is I think this should be, I think all pilots should understand this to be the most concerning and the most, like, say, it's like you have like green, yellow, and red. This is like yellow going to red. Okay. And you need to respect it. When you're in position to depart on a runway and a landing aircraft is in that zone of about 4 to 3 miles out on final. Okay. And so if the landing aircraft is at 3 miles, okay, that is technically the separation limit, but the FAA allows 3 to 2 if you can quickly get the aircraft in front, into position and just depart it super fast, so that you can have, let's say, between 3 and 2 miles separation, or 3 closing to 2 if it's later going to expand out to 3. And I think we should regard that as the most critical runway environment situation, except for maybe crossing runway situations where we're not fully aware of what's going on the crossing runway. And I mean, if you're clear to take off and the runway you're on is like the only runway due to winds and they're not using the crossing runway. I mean, but if you know that both runways are being used, it's like crossing runways, like at Hobby Airport in Houston, you better damn well know what's going on the crossing runway, no matter what clearance you're given, no matter what clearance you think you've been given. And don't just blindly accept a clearance if you don't have SA on what's going on the crossing runway. I'm sorry. I think that has to be the way to look at it, because it's like you're dealing with stuff that is like, really, it's like I wouldn't say it's the same as handling a loaded pistol. I think it's the same as being given a loaded machine gun without a safety. Okay, in a football game. Okay, so somebody gives you a loaded machine gun and you're at a football game with 90,000 people, and you're given a machine gun without a safety and something's wrong with it. You better have that attitude about, accepting a clearance if you don't know what's going on the crossing runway, or if you're not fully situationally aware of what's going on with landing traffic when you've been cleared into position and hold, to line up and wait, or to maybe for an expedited departure, take off, clear to take off, no delay, whatever. You better know exactly what the separation is. And if you have any doubts about your ability to get your final flow, the last items of the takeoff checklist, if you don't think you can do that like that, then no, you can just tell the tower, oh, we're busy for a second. Can we have a minute? And no problem. I mean, it's just not worth it. So, at some point, it doesn't really matter what ATC says. And I remember back, I'm sorry, I don't think we were better pilots back in the day. I'm not going to go for that, but I'm just saying the way I was trained, and maybe I was just lucky, or maybe I don't know. And I had friends who were also pilots. I had a friend who was in the Navy, and he also confirmed that they were trained the same way, that when Tower gives you a clearance to enter a live runway, you don't trust it. You first make sure there's no traffic that maybe Tower forgot about on final. Or you're at least aware of what the final traffic, what their distance is. If that's not clear here, you're not ready to go. Okay. And the other thing too, and this is important, even if you haven't been told to switch to Tower frequency, when you're taxiing out, one of the crew members should be monitoring Tower well in advance of getting to the end of the runway, just because you want to start developing the picture of what's going on around the airport. Okay. And I think that's way the hell more important than any bullshit about, talking about rolling coal and just having or even just a sterile cockpit, but just sort of being like an automatic pilot, basically, where you're not thinking. I think the taxi out is where your essay starts. And I think it's deadly. I mean, it's serious, and yeah, it's routine, but it's routine, deadly stuff, and I'm sorry, but, just a little complacency around an airport and you'll end up killing more people than Ted Bundy. Right. And so, for a pilot to be just a little bit complacent is like the same thing as being a psychopath in the real world. Right. That's how dangerous flying is. Okay. Because to kill 100 plus people or 300 people in the real world, you got to be a bad person, right? But to kill a bunch of people, 300 people in an airport environment, you just have to be a little bit distracted, And so the standard for aviation is, just a little bit of distraction, just a little bit of not being 100%, just a little complacent. that puts you at the level of being a mass murderer, and if you can't handle that, you got to take it on, I mean, I don't know how to say it. Like, I understand, like, I'm the kind of person, I don't like to be dramatic, right? I hate it. I hate being dramatic, but I'm not saying be dramatic, but take on the danger, take on the reality that this is serious shit, So I'm going to try to describe a few incidents where I don't feel like other aviation YouTubers, and I'm not an aviation YouTuber, but I'm just saying people who are aviation YouTubers. I'm going to talk about a few incidents where I did not hear an emphasis on you don't have to accept clearance, right? I've heard emphasis on the things of ATC, on, just why not also emphasize you don't have to accept a clearance. You can be given a clearance. Just because you're given a clearance to take off, really, it doesn't mean anything if you're not ready for it. And if you're not ready for it, you can just tell the tower, oh, thank you, but we'll wait, while we get our heads together. It's not a big deal. It really isn't a big deal, I don't think. All right, so let's talk about a couple incidents. Okay, the first one was September 11th. I'm sorry, just a couple of years ago, right? It was September 11th, 2021. So it's pretty recent. All right, this is a little bit after the pandemic, or sort of mid-pandemic, but after the worst of the pandemic. And this is Reno Airport. Okay, this is Reno in Nevada, right? And you have a Delta 2666, and I can't remember if it was a 7.3 or it was an MD-80. I'm just going to go ahead and say it was either an MD-80 or a 717. Let's just, forgive me if I'm wrong. I'm going to say it's an MD-80, right? Just let me say it's an MD-80. They got rid of their MD-80s, but I think in 2021, or we'll say it's a 717. But either way, let's just say Delta 2666. You got an airliner who is on final. I can't remember the runway. If I say it's 17, whatever. It's just on final for a north-south runway, right? And so you have Delta 2666 on getting to be kind of short final, not short final, but like say 4-3, right? And then you have Southwest 3271, all right, which is in position, not in position. It's ready at the end of, hasn't entered the runway, but ready at the end of this runway. I'm going to go ahead and say it's 17. I don't remember if it's 17. Okay, so the tower tells Southwest, okay, that Delta 2666 is on a 3-mile final, right? A 3-mile final, right? Okay, and Southwest comes back and says, oh, I didn't catch that. They didn't catch part of the transmission, or they had some issue understanding so right there, okay, I don't know if it was a problem with the radios. I don't know if the pilots were in conversation, or maybe they were doing some checklists, or maybe they were monitoring another frequency. I don't know. It doesn't matter. Maybe, but the bottom line is Southwest did not hear clearly the instruction. But the instruction included information that the other airplane was at 3 miles. Okay. Now, normally, now here I'm going to put this on the controller as well. But the idea that when an airplane is on a 3-mile final, okay, that is when you're now not in the green light to take off for the guy waiting. You're now in the yellow. Okay, because it's 3-2, but you can't get less than 2. So, and planes, even on final, they travel pretty fast. So you only have a few seconds to get on the runway and just get out of there, right? So Southwest didn't really process the instruction, and I'm not even sure they fully processed that the other plane was on 3-mile final. So I think the tower should have canceled that clearance, because in order to get somebody on the runway when it's 3 closing to 2, okay, the airplane is cleared to take off, better have no issues, okay? And not properly hearing the first time, that's an issue. So the tower should not have repeated that clearance, okay? Because now the airplane, just in that time, is taken for Southwest to let the tower know they haven't kind of understood the clearance. Now the airplane is now at 3 closing to 2, right? And now the tower should just give that up. But on the pilots as well. Okay, whenever you're in a runway environment, okay, and you're given a clearance that you don't understand and you need it repeated, right? Okay, in my opinion, also included in that package is what is our SA as to the traffic on that runway, okay? In other words, we're already now complicating our understanding because we already misunderstood a clearance. Now, you have to assume the worst. Assume the worst. Assume you've been given a clearance, but under conditions where traffic is an issue, all right? You've wasted time by asking for that clearance to be repeated. So as a crew, If you're asking for a repeat or a clarification of a clearance, you have to assume that whatever traffic situation was there has become more complicated as you're asking for a repeat. And you have to assume the tower is capable also of being distracted and absent-minded, and maybe is focusing on repeating their clearance to you and not paying attention to how a traffic situation has complicated. You have to assume the worst. Always assume that when you're given a traffic clearance, when you're given a takeoff clearance, that there's a traffic situation, and you either know it or you don't know it. Okay. And my feeling is that I think Southwest was at the end of the runway, and I don't think they engaged their SA. It's kind of like turning on the radar. I don't think they turned on their situational awareness radar before they started talking about getting a clearance. I think they were just receiving the clearance. Okay. So then they get the repeat of the clearance, but the tower sheepishly tells them, you better, this is like for immediate departure. And Southwest is just kind of glib about it. And in my opinion, that reflects that they probably weren't monitoring tower enough prior to getting to the runway. They were probably distracted, they're probably distracted. They probably weren't monitoring tower enough as they got to the end of the runway in order to fully understand the picture of all the aircraft around the airport, especially this Delta that was now getting close to 2-mile final, right? As Southwest got the repeat instruction. Okay, so they were kind of glib about it. And I think this is the complacency, right? This is the lack of taking serious and being very, very, take it to heart how dangerous these situations are. And okay, now I'm not going to get dramatic about the danger. If it's clear weather, and if everybody is sharp, and we can criticize Delta here too. A good pilot will sidestep a little bit. In other words, you'll get off the runway center line if you're going to have to go around, so that you're not like right on top of the taking off traffic. So I'm gonna put some on Delta as well. But I'm just saying, the Southwest now accepts the repeat of the clearance, and the time it took to repeat the clearance, the plane got from 3, I think, to 2 miles or close to 2 miles separation. So, and then Southwest probably didn't set the world's record for getting the final checks and just getting rolling as fast as possible. And so it became a situation where Delta got very close, and they felt that Southwest hadn't even started rolling, okay, on their takeoff. And the closure was just so much that Delta had to initiate the go around. And I think it was before even Tower had said anything, right? And so, I don't think that this was terribly dangerous. It didn't have to be, because it was good weather. All right. It was good weather, and Delta could have sidestepped just by, 500 feet, 700 feet, just sidestep to not be exactly on the same center line, because then you could end up flying like right on top of the other airplane. So, as I understand it, Delta, I didn't hear any indications that they made a sidestep, just a little bit of a sidestep, And I think they also expressed on the radio how irritated and upset they were that Southwest was cleared to take off in front of them so close. Okay. And they made kind of a sarcastic comment. And I think that, again, I'm not going to say that's complacency, but that's not putting the safety first, right? And so I think with Southwest, you had the complacency, okay, not having the full sight picture, not having the full situational awareness before they even got to the end, or before they actually told the tower they were ready to go, okay. And then they had issues understanding the clearance as it was given to them, and had it repeated, okay. And I think if you have to ask the time it takes to get a clearance repeated, whatever traffic situation may be, there is going to get worse. Right. And so apparently they were just in that complacency spot, and that caused them to have a diminished sense of appreciating what was really going on around them, that another airplane was now going to close within 2 miles, and maybe even less, as they were wasting and probably taking too much time to get rolling once they got on. So it sounds to me like Southwest was kind of distracted. But then on Delta's part, they let their emotions, because they were frustrated, right? You got to put that all, I mean, that's the thing, it's not good enough just to have normal mental health. To be a pilot, you have to have mental fitness. Mental fitness is sort of like mental health is like the same as saying, oh, I don't have a mental illness. I don't have, I don't have mental problems. But mental fitness is like the same thing as, hey, I'm not just a person without illness. I'm a person who runs 10 miles and I can lift weights and I'm in good shape, like being an athlete, right? And so I think to be a pilot, you have to be mentally, it's not just, oh, I'm just lacking personality flaws, or I'm lacking, symptoms or whatever, or problems. No, I think to be a pilot, you have to be mentally like an athlete is to the physical for physical health. So, I think we should stop talking about the mental condition of pilots as, oh, hopefully he doesn't have mental conditions. No, the standard for a pilot should be that mentally you're like an athlete. You are essentially an athlete mentally. And if that's not the standard, then these are exactly the situations where we're going to have eventually, I'm sorry, we're going to have a repeat of the LAX disaster, right? There's going to be a repeat of that on some level, except that it may be worse, And I don't think people have to be reminded that in the Canary Islands, you had the Pan Am KLM crash, in part due to complacency, to personality issues, the same story really. And you had two 747s colliding on the same runway. And that was actually the worst disaster, and essentially it's just mass killing, and I think pilots, the KLM pilots in the Canary Islands, the captain who's really guilty for all this, he just wanted to get back home, didn't want to waste time. And I'm sorry, he was forgetting, he was zoning out mentally. He was losing his mental, athlete status basically, because he was forgetting that there's like 500 lives, that are in his hands, and it's just too much responsibility to allow that kind of bullshit complacency. And that's really what it is, just bullshit. Anyway, so Delta's frustrated. So Delta initiates a go around, but nowhere did I hear that they took, let's say a little evasive action to get a little sidestep so that they wouldn't be like right on top of the Southwest. And later on the radio, he reported he couldn't really see the Southwest because he was just under his nose. So why weren't they sidestepping? I mean, it's just, I think they were so caught up in being frustrated and also showing off the tower how impossible it was for them to manage the situation as opposed to just dealing with it. Because in the end, it's not a question of fault. It's a question of not getting too close to the other aircraft, so it's like safety first, right? Okay. So, but then a much more serious incident, okay, was in Austin, Texas, okay? And let me see if I got this right. This was February 5th of 2023, just this year, okay, February 5th. You had a FedEx 1432, which is a heavy 7.6, I think. Let me say 7.6. I don't think it was an MD-11. All right, let's say it's a 7.6. And this guy is on a Cat 3 ILS. Okay, what that means is that he's going to land basically with no visibility. This is fog. This is basically fog. If it's not fog, it's a super low ceiling. But basically, this is a very low visibility situation, all right, where this FedEx guy, he can't see the runway from above. Okay, he's not even going to be able to tell if Southwest is taxied in front of him. Okay, so here's a situation unlike Reno, where the FedEx is not going to be able to directly see what's happening. Okay, and so while they're all in the same frequency, and I'd like to know what happened here, because you have Southwest who pops on the frequency and says, we're ready to go, right after the tower had cleared the FedEx 1432 for a Cat 3 landing. All right, a Category 3 landing means no visibility, basically. All right. And so I'm wondering if Southwest was really monitoring tower a little bit in advance of their call, or if they were maybe had tower frequency tuned, if they had it tuned up, but maybe they were busy in the cockpit with some of their own cockpit checks, and maybe weren't fully processing that you had, an airplane cleared for a Cat 3. And so they tell the tower they're ready, and the tower then clears them, to take off. But he lets them know that the other aircraft is on a 3-mile final. Okay, a 3-mile final. Okay, and I wonder if Southwest really took it to heart that other airplane was on a 3-mile final. I just wonder. I think sometimes, people go into automatic pilot. It's just, okay, we're clear to take off. Let's go. You kind of trust that tower is not going to clear you to take off if the other guy is not a certain distance away. It's sort of just this trust the system. Just, we do this every day. Well, it's not routine at all because the weather is crappy, right? And so normally you can actually see, or you actually have better situational awareness. But I just think that all pilots, just like you turn on your radar, it's one of the checklist items before you get on the runway. You need to turn on your SA, before you get within anywhere near where you're ready to call tower. Hopefully, even though you're doing all your checks, somebody's monitoring tower a little early just to kind of get a picture of what's going on. And if you're given a clearance where you're told that the other aircraft is on a 3-mile final, I'm sorry, under those conditions, okay, yeah, take the clearance if you're ready to go like now. Okay, but if there's going to be any issues, or if you're just a little bit behind, just tell the tower you can wait. Because in this case, because of the visibility, this was a really close call, and this could have really hurt a lot of people. So anyway, appreciate you guys watching. Thanks.